Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. And first of all, I would like to thank the organizing committee for inviting me today, and also, moreover, to push me to come. And the reason why I say that is that when I look at the program, I said, actually, to talk about innovations for a company like Biostan, which is mostly active in the infant formula, is a kind of challenge, because you know this industry is heavily regulated and strongly regulated, I would say, and innovation is scarce. Although we have seen some innovation in the past. So after giving a thought to that, I said it might be good to tell you something about the innovation process in infant formula. So my talk will be organized around the 4 points that we can see here. The first time I will give some information about our company, for those of you who don't know too much. Then we will talk about the innovation in infant formula, what has been done in the last few years. And I will invite you in a journey regarding the HMO, which is human milk oligosaccharides, and which I think, and I'm not the only one to think about it, which I think is going to be a burning topic in infant formula in the future. And not only in infant formula, I think in general food and maybe diet with supplement as well. And we will talk of the next step, what we do actually to develop this science. So let's start with this, with some information regarding Biostan company. So Biostan is a Chinese company. We are actually the first Chinese company in infant formula. In front of us we have only foreign ones. And the previous speakers have talked about the interest of Chinese consumers to buy overseas products, and this is a good example in infant formula, I would say, as you all know. So we have been established in 1999, starting with a probiotic business, actually, because the concept was that infants in China were given too many antibiotics, and there was a lot of problem regarding the immune system. So the company started with probiotics, and later on decided in 2006 to finally concentrate it on baby nutrition, and definitely start to look at infant formula. So we developed infant formula in 2008, and then later on we started to develop other SKUs like baby cereals and also personal care products for babies. In 2010 we went public in Hong Kong, where we have 25% of our stake, which is in a Hong Kong stock. And later on, we also in 2013 started to invest heavily in France with a French co-op. This is very interesting because we are the only good example, I think, of a Chinese company being a partner and a shareholder of a French cooperative. You know the cooperative, they are owned by farmers, so to become to a cooperative, you have to be a farmer, but we are not farmer actually. But actually we have, because we support this industry by building a new production plant in France, we have had the right to become a shareholder of this co-op. Later on, I would say we have also one part important is we invest a lot of research, and we have developed strong collaborations, and I will talk about it later on, especially on microbiota platforms, which is exactly what we need for this industry and for this HMO business actually at this moment. We have also more recently looked at the extensions of our business behind the infant formula by acquiring an Australian company, which is Swiss, actually. The name is Swiss, but it's Australian, in vitamin, mineral, and supplements, so that Biostan today is able to, let's say, supply goods for babies and adult nutrition. So if we look at our portfolio, we have a lot of different SKUs, as you can see, mostly our infant formula, probiotics, where we are very strong, baby cereals, also baby care product, and vitamin and minerals. So coming back to our topic today, we will see something about innovation in infant formula. If I look at innovations, you all know innovation is a very complicated process. The first thing is that you need to have a market need. You need to evaluate very well your market needs. And it can be improvement of your product, it can be something else, it can be a completely new product, it can be packaging, it can be also price. So you have to really identify what is this market needs. And the second point is that you have to see if the technology is acceptable. Is the technology available or acceptable for your product? Like for instance, today when we talk about nanotechnology, for instance, it's not in cosmetics, I would say, it's not very well accepted by the consumer, although it might have some good benefits. Then the third point is really regulations. How you can regulate this market, and because regulation is very important. And as I said before in my introductions, especially for infant formula, this is extremely important that you are completely compliant with regulations, and regulation is extremely difficult to achieve. So when you have all of this, it's maybe not enough because then you need to have customer acceptance. And to answer the question of the consumer expectation and aspirations. Why? Because sometimes, and it's not sometimes, but most of the time now, the consumer not only needs a product, but he needs to buy the product for a company he likes, or he thinks that this company is a good company for him. So that means that the value of the company is a value that he can share. So you have also to be very careful on where you are, on how you sell your product, and you want to answer the consumer's aspirations. The previous speaker was talking about how China can develop the food outside China, and this is a big problem, of course, because you need to have big brands, and you have to have brand recognition, and this is what the previous speaker was talking about. So in infant formula, I would say for us, what has been also compulsory and more difficult to achieve is the fact that before you have all this regulation problem, or all this regulation system, then you need to have all the process from discovery, small-scale productions, on the safety data, toxicological data, clinical development, and regulatory aspect. And after this, only you can maybe enjoy to sell the product. So, but basically, if we look at infant formula in the last decade, I would say, there have been some innovations. Which are mentioned here. That is not an exhaustive list. I select the ones that are more important, I think, for everyone that knows a little bit about this market. And it is in general split in these three segments that we have in infant formula. That means helping on the development of balanced immune system, on the favor of good digestions, and also support the brain and visions. So we have seen several developments, starting with probiotics, which has enjoyed a good market share also in China, with many brands having probiotics in their infant formula. Prebiotics, of course, in the sense of using growth or force as a food for the good bacteria, intestinal good bacteria. Nucleotide, lactoferrin, which are some examples of innovations that have been brought on the market some years ago. If we look at digestions, we have a lot of things that have been done, especially with the help of manufacturers of dairy ingredients, where they have been able to select or enrich their product in alpha-lactalbumin or make hydrolyzed protein for better digestion. So there's been quite something, and also probiotic and prebiotic have been used also in these claims. And I have a special mention for the OPO, which is a structural lipid that actually our company has been the first one to really introduce in China in 2008, and which is structural lipids that are very important for the absorption of calcium, absorption of lipids, and alleviation of constipation for babies. So this is the kind of innovation that we have seen again the last few years. And I will finish with, for instance, of course, DHA and lutein choline that you know also for the brain development and visual development. So if I put a clock here, it's not because we are close to having lunch. It's just to say that when we talk about innovations, we have to talk about time. And actually, time is always very important for two reasons, because innovation takes time, but also innovations, you have to arrive at the right time. So sometimes it's too early, and the consumer is not ready to accept it. So, if now that we can enter the third point of my presentation, which will be this journey to HMO. Why I put this journey, you will see that, because we will see from the very beginning what happens and what has been the discovery and what is the status of this human milk oligosaccharide at this moment. So let's go again for this. On the topic that we will see now is what are the HMOs. I'm sure that maybe some of you know about it, but some of you know. So it's brand new, even though the history will show that it's not so new. We'll talk about the HMO, we'll talk about the metabolism of HMO, we'll talk about their effect, mostly the prebiotic effect, but also we'll talk about their antimicrobial and anti-infective effect, which is extremely important for babies' nutrition, but not only for babies, as I said, also maybe for adults. So if you are ready for the journey, then we can start this journey right now. And we start with the very early days, okay? We start today in 1899, so it's not yesterday, right? With this French doctor, his name is Henri Tissier, and he was working at Pasteur Institute at the turn of the 20th century. And he was working actually with one very famous also researcher at that time, Elie Metchnikov, who has basically invented the concept of probiotics. And this doctor made a very fundamental discovery. When he analyzed the feces of babies that were breastfed compared to babies that were formula fed, he discovered that there was a specific bacteria in these feces. And he named this bacteria, because of the side of this bacteria has two tails, he named this bacteria Lactobacillus bifidus. And this Bacillus bifidus was only seen in the breastfed infant, not in the formula-fed infant. And the second discovery he did was that this specific bacteria he isolated, and when he administered this bacteria to babies, he was able to alleviate problem of diarrhea, for instance. That was very common at that time. So not only this bacteria was specific for the human breast milk, but also had a very strong function. So we conclude from this study that most probably there was something in the human breast milk that was very important to develop these specific functions on gut flora in babies. But then we had to wait 50 years about since Georgi and co-worker started to look at it more carefully, and they made three discoveries, I think, very important. The first one is that this specific oligosaccharide, or this specific bifidofactor, was present mostly in colostrum and human milk, and there was hardly any in cow's milk. And the second point is that they also see that this oligosaccharide, or this actually bifidofactor, was present also on other secretions like saliva, semen, tears, and whatever. So not only in milk. And finally, they said that these substances were probably linked to N-acetylglucosamine, so some amine sugars that were isolated at that time. So we have to wait still some years for 1957 to be able to really analyze and discover that these oligosaccharides were made of special sugars, especially fructose and acetylglucosamine, sialic acid, and this was not known at that time. And we have also to wait 1964, to see that these oligosaccharides were also isolated in the feces of breastfed infants. So that means that not only they were isolated in breast milk, but they were also isolated in feces of breastfed infants, so that means that probably they will not be completely metabolized in the body. So what are these HMOs? They are not normal sugar that we eat or we put in our coffee or in our tea. They are not the candies that we have from time to time. No, there are special sugars with these kind of structures where you can see you have mostly lactose, which is based on glucose and galactose, but also glucosamine, galactosamine, fructose, and also sialic acid, so noraminic acid. So this is a special structure. And what is also very important is that if you look at the blueprint of this oligosaccharides, there are a lot of them. They have different structures, but basically based on the same motif, which is the lactose, N-acetylglucosamine, and so on. And we have been able to identify about 150 to 200 of them in the human breast milk. Actually, when we say that, we have to see that there are some of them which are really present in major amount, and this is especially the 2-fucosyl lactose, which is here, and the 3-fucosyl lactose as well, the cereal lactose, and the lacto-N tetraose. So this one represents probably more than 60% of the overall oligosaccharides that are present in human breast milk. So what has been done after 1964, when we have isolated this oligosaccharide and see that they were present both in breastfed and also in formula fed. 3 years later, in 1967, we have been able to see that there was a very strong association between the presence of 2-fucosyl lactose in breast milk and secretions, and also the Lewis blood group of the mother. This Lewis blood group is like the ABO group, but it's a different one. It's a blood group that is expressed not only in red blood cells, but also in different secretions like saliva or even different tissues. And we had to wait for 1984 to see that this Lewis blood group was completely linked to a glycosyltransferase, so one enzyme which is able to bring the fructose on this bipose of lactose and N-acetylglucosamine. And this is very important, I will show you, because actually we have been able to isolate 2 genes, FUT2 and FUT3, which are responsible for the synthesis of these oligosaccharides. And these FUT2 and FUT3 genes, they have some mutations in the population. So the genetic mutations are very well known, and we know that in the Chinese population, for instance, we have about 30%, you can see we have 30% of mothers who are not able to produce 2-fucosyl lactose because they have mutation on the gene of FUT2. And this is more important than in Europe, where only 20% are FUT2 genes secretory deficient. So that means that with this kind of analysis, they've been able to see the link between the genetics and the production of these specific oligosaccharides. And again, having this specific oligosaccharide having a very strong function, as we will see in a minute. So if we look at the composition of the milk regarding the oligosaccharide, you see that it's not a minor thing, it's a very major thing. Because oligosaccharide can be as high as the protein level in human breast milk. So 1.2% for proteins and up to 1.5% also for oligosaccharides. But if you compare with cow's milk, then cow's milk you have much more protein, as we know, but we have absolutely no oligosaccharides. So this is why companies like Biosime and others, we are always concerned to improve our product closer to muscle breast milk, even though we know that it's very difficult. But we know that cow's milk is not enough to supply all the elements that are necessary for the baby's nutrition. So, in conclusion, at this time, what are HMOs? First of all, they are the most abundant component in human breast milk, the third most abundant component in human breast milk, after the lipids on the carbohydrate. Their composition is very dependent on the woman and also on genetics, so we know that. And it's also dependent on the lactation time. We have more than 150 of these HMOs, but as I said, with major one, which is mostly the 2FL and the 3FL and 6-sialyl lactose. We have intergenetics differences, and also, as I said, we have differences during lactation. And they are not present in infant formula, for sure, not yet, but we'll see when they can be present. And in infant formula, we have, of course, oligosaccharides, like growth hormones that we have been using for many years, but they are structurally different from the HMO, so they can supply some of the functions, but not all the functions. So if we look at the HMO metabolisms, if this is a baby, he has breastfed mother milk, and then we can have these oligosaccharides going to the stomach, going all along the small intestine and going to the large intestine, where they do actually their functions. So these HMO are very resistant to low pH. They are also resistant to all the pancreatic enzymes and brush border cells enzymes. They are poorly absorbed, but about 1 or 2% are absorbed, and we know that there are also some functions, systemic functions of these oligosaccharides. And then they arrive in the colon where they play the role, and we will see in more details what kind of role they play. And they can be either consumed or also for some of them excreted. And this is the reason why these early studies in the 50s and the 50s have been able to isolate these oligosaccharides from the baby's feces. So if we look at their metabolisms, they are again resistant to pH, and we can find them in the breastfed infant feces. We can also find them in urine because they have some systemic absorptions. Not too much, as I said, but it seems that they can play a role by absorptions also in the immune system. And so we will see one important point today is that their prebiotic effect. And their prebiotic effect, as you know, the prebiotics, they are mostly defined as kind of fibers that arrive in the colon, so not absorbed in the small intestine, but arrive in the colon, and are fermented by specific bacteria in the colon. So the effect is like this. If you have a population of, to make it simple, good and bad bacteria, then if you supply the HMO at this level, then you will see that you will have development of your good bacteria, especially bifidobacteria, in that case, because they can consume this specific food, while the bad bacteria are not able to do it. So if we take this, for instance, this is not food for these bad bacteria, not at all, but actually, the good bacteria, and especially bifidobacteria, they are able to consume this molecule. And if we look at more details about the consumption of these molecules, we can see different things. We can see that, first of all, they have some extracellular enzymes, like sialylases or fucosilases, that can actually degrade outside the oligosaccharides. And when the size is smaller, they can actually absorb these oligosaccharides and metabolize them, especially the lactose, and metabolize them and actually produce the short chain fatty acid, which are the main fuel for the colonic cells. So very important element for the nutrition of our intestine. What is very important is that actually one key bacteria, which is Bifidobacterium infantis, which has been isolated in the very early time, and which is the main major bacteria present in the feces of breastfed babies. This is kind of selfish bacteria. They don't have anything outside the cell. They can absorb all these oligosaccharides and metabolize them inside the cells. So that means that they can really grow and develop themselves in the intestine and protect the babies. And on top of that, we have been able to see now that the oligosaccharides, not only they are good food for them, but are also improving the adhesions of the bifidobacteria. So these bifidobacteria, you can see a pictures here with these two terms that I was telling you. These bifidobacteria, they are very well equipped for degrading all carbohydrates. So they have a very, very strong enzymatic equipment and very specific equipment for doing that. And so this is why they are so important in the baby feces. So if you look at the adhesions, which is the second point, which is very important for HMOs. Why adhesion is important? Because if you look at infections, you need first to have a link of the bacteria to the cells. If there is no link of bacteria to the cells, there is no infection. So on the evolution has made that the bacteria, they can recognize some of our motifs, some of our carbohydrates present in our intestinal cells, and then they can look at it and bind to this, and after the bind, it's very easy for them to actually invade. Okay, so this is the normal process. So what we have seen with the HMO is that if you put HMOs, they have a structure which is very close or sometimes identical to what is present in the epithelial cells, and then they will lock the binding site of the bad bacteria, I would say, and then in that case there will not be any adhesions. And if there is no adhesions, there is no infection. So this is true for bacteria, but it's also true for viruses. It's also true from some worms or other things. So and we know now that if we see a lot of these different HMOs, they have different actions on binding different kind of bacteria, like Helicobacter pylori, which is very responsible for gastric ulcers, or Candida albicans, which is very common also in some babies. And especially for the fucosyl lactose, you can see that it binds very well the E. coli, which is responsible for a lot of diarrhea in infants. So we can see that, as I said, these HMO are not only important in the future for baby's nutrition, but also for adult nutrition, because we can see that they can actually bind some pathogenic bacteria like Pseudomonas aeruginosa, which is responsible for lung infections. And that means that if we administer these specific compounds to the body, then we will have a fair chance to limit the infections by these pathogenic bacteria. And this is really what happened in the lung infections, and where which is actually a very serious case. So that means that we really consider that now, due to the fact that we have a lot of resistant bacteria to antibiotics everywhere in the world, the use of these kind of compounds can really alleviate infections, and is a new way to treat some diseases. So regarding the anti-infective and anti-diarrhea actions of HMOs, you can see here that if you administer HMOs, you will decrease strongly the risk of diarrhea linked to Campylobacter jejuni, or linked also to some viruses here. And there is good work that has been done recently on the norovirus. Norovirus is kind of a retrovirus, which is very common in babies and also in adults. And norovirus has no real treatment today. It's not easy to treat and give rise to a lot of diarrhea, especially in children. And the 2-fucosyl lactose has very strong actions against this specific virus, and can be really administered to prevent this infection. So again, the anti-adhesive, antimicrobial actions is the second point for which these HMO are important, and their effect is structure specific. So what they do actually, and why we are interested by the HMOs. If you look at this picture, you can see that you have a lot of differences now between the old time, I would say the old time when we have vaginal delivery of babies and breastfeeding, which does not represent too much conditions today in China, versus the vaginally born and bottle-fed, and versus what is the standard situation in China, which is C-sections on not breastfeeding. So, because in I think a city like Shanghai, probably more than 50% of newborn babies are born by C-sections. And the fact that you have C-sections, of course, you don't contaminate your babies with the vaginal flora, and but you contaminate your baby with the environment in the hospital. And if you don't breastfeed, so that means that you don't administer the HMOs, which will be very important to defend your babies. So this is a double risk. So we enter into the double risk situation with this system. So this is why the fact that we have HMOs is even not a question mark. It's something that we are pretty sure is going to be very helpful, and we have seen by history that it's very helpful. So where are we now? If we have talked about these 3 points, in '93 we have started to see that this HMO could be produced by chemical route. There has been some synthesis of HMO in '93 and at lab scale, and also in '98 by biochemistry using enzymes and fermentations have been able to produce this HMO. So the situation today is the following. After we are now in 2016, so after so many years of discovery, we have some companies able to produce, not that many, some companies able to produce already HMO, especially the 2FL and 3FL, on an industrial scale. So this is already available. And by 2 routes. On these 2 routes, there are the chemical routes, and there are the fermentation route using yeast or E. coli as a vector for the fermentations. The production capacity is still not very huge, but it's growing, and I think it's growing quite fast. And we'll be able to supply the industry, I think, very soon. When I say very soon, it can be also even next year. If we look at the regulatory aspect, so not only the production is there, but also regulatory aspect, as I say, is extremely important. There are 2 companies already having registered the product in the US, so having a GRAS petition. You know, GRAS is generally recognized as safe petitions, so this has been done. So for the different applications that you can see here, so infant food, also medical nutrition, and general nutrition and dietary supplement. So that means that today, at this time, we can produce infant formula in US with 2-fucosyl lactose, for instance. So this is allowed and this is possible. And in EU, 1 company is already registered as novel food applications, and another one is nearly completing this registration that will be available at the end of the year. So I said maybe soon in China, yes, maybe soon in China. I hope it will be soon in China as well. I know that there has been some discussion with the MOH about it, and but most probably MOH will wait for the full registration in Europe and US, and some example of sales in these countries. This is in general the general practice that the FDA is on the MOH are using to register product in China. But I really hope that this will not take too long, because it's a very important innovation in infant formula, as we will see. Innovation that takes some time to arrive, but will definitely be very important for the market. So I will finish my talk in a few minutes, just to say what next. For a company like Biostam, it's very important to be present in these activities, and we have created our institute, Biostam Institute for Nutrition and Care, which is a non-profit organization, which both is a research platform on research funding project to develop activities with the medical and scientific community here in China, and it's also an online and offline scientific communication platform, because we think that it's very important to communicate science. And so this platform, this big platform, has today about 5,000 or more of doctors that belongs to this, with mostly pediatricians, nutritionists, and gynecologists, and we use these experts to review our project and to give advices, and also to organize some symposium and so on. So what we have done also in this big activity is that we have created our microbiota platform in Guangzhou. And you know that today is more easier to analyze the gut flora by genetic techniques. This is quite well established, and I think China has a good experience in this activity as well. It's easier to analyze the gut flora of babies or mother, or the microbiota of human breast milk, or even of skin or baby or whatever. So we think this is key for the development of HMOs, because several things. First of all, we have seen that we have necessarily some differences between the genetics of mother 1 or mother 2. Okay, so there are some internal differences that we have to understand, and we have to see how they can affect the efficacy of our product. The second point is that we need definitely to check and to verify the efficacy of our product on the gut flora. The gut flora, as you know, is a very strong organ, a very important organ for the health. So we have to be very cautious on how we actually develop our product and test our product. So we have been in collaboration. We are in collaboration with the French companies, Institut Mérieux, who is very strong in our microbiota platform, and we have signed a technology transfer agreement some time ago. We have built our platform in Guangzhou, in our new technical center that has been opened in last June. And I would say we have a strong collaboration with this group, but we have also collaboration with some groups here in China, of course, because as I said, China is very strong in data processing and also in all the microbiota technologies that are very developed in this country. So this is for us a key element where we can again give a lot of support to our research. And this support can be done through the analysis of human breast milk, through the analysis of gut flora. And what is extremely important is that we have to work on biobanking, so to have enough information on the mother, on the donor, on the babies, so that we can come back to these samples later on, maybe in 5 years or 10 years, and to see if when the technology will be even more developed, if we can find something more important for the baby health. So actually, this is just the final slide to see that we still need a lot of equipment, of course, to analyze everything. But my point was today to give you an overview on these HMO situations. I hope that you have learned something on HMO, at least for the innovation process. You see that it can take 120 years before we can bring on the market something which will have definitely a very important role in infant nutrition. And we have still some time before lunch, but we have also some time for questions if you have any questions. I would like to thank you for your attention.
I'm YP from QHD, and I've got two questions if you don't mind. So the first question will be, you spoke a lot about 2-butyl-lactose, so 2FL, and you mentioned at the end that it's manufactured chemically and organically. Yep. So what I want to ask is there any GMO sort of aspect to manufacturing it using fermentation? And if there is, what is your personal viewpoint on adding something that is GMO into infant formula? So that's the first question. The second question would be, you mentioned something about bacteria eating the HMO. So the bacteria has to secrete some sort of enzyme to break the HMO down into smaller pieces before they can take it. So does that mean that with current existing oligosaccharide like phos and GOS, that maybe the shorter chain of GOS, because it's a spectrum of molecules. Maybe the shorter chain of GOS will be more effective than the longer chain, because we know that the non-nutritia, you know, they promote the short chain GOS. So what is Bioslam's view on that?
Okay, very interesting question. For the first question, yes, there is a chemical rules. So the chemical rules is of course complex on use a lot of chemicals that you have to be very careful also on the final product. But this has been assessed for the safety point of view, and I think this is very clear. And for the biotechnology side, actually, it's not really HMO. You need to have a system which produce your fucosyl lactose through I would say processing head system. So you need a bacteria which has been recombinant bacteria for sure, like E. coli or yeast, which contain the two fucosylases, for instance, inside. And then you need to have a substrate like lactose or glycerol that goes into the bacteria and is transformed by the bacteria and goes outside. Then you have the two fucosyl lactose. And then you remove the two fucosyl lactose and you remove the bacteria, so you don't have any bacteria or gene or whatever which is present in your two fucosyl lactose. So you cannot consider it as a GMO product because it's the same as, for instance, for enzymes. I can give you an example that I know for many years. When I was in the enzyme business, we produce to produce cheese. You need a clotting enzyme, right? Okay, you need and usually in the past we are using the calf enzyme, the calf enzyme, and then this has been replaced by the same enzyme produced by yeast by genetic engineering. Okay, and this enzyme is on the market for maybe 30 years now. I think the first registration in Europe was maybe in 1985, something like this. So today we are using this enzyme to make any kind of cheese in Europe and also in the US. So it's kind of the yeast in that case or the bacteria is just a processing head. It's just a kind of enzyme system. So for me, it's not the genetic engineering. It's not a GMO product. Because first of all, you don't have any DNA inside the product. It's very clear. It's a pharmaceutical grade product without any DNA, without any endotoxin in any sense. And again, this has been assessed also for the safety point of view by the GRAS applications, also by the EFSA applications. So I understand the question, but I think for ourselves, our position is that it's definitely not GMO. It's just processing it. And for your second questions, that was linked to the GOS and FOS. And GOS, if the long chain were less active than the short chain, probably yes, I think. I would say probably yes, because I don't think that the long chain oligosaccharides are very, let's say, because the linkage is always the same in GOS or FOS, so there's not that many changes on the linkage. So that means that in that case, most probably the small ones are more active than the bigger oligosaccharides. That's my